Welcome to the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. Each week, Matt, Kurt, Jerry, and the occasional special guest explore how the trauma-informed paradigm challenges traditional beliefs and approaches concerning a wide variety of areas. This podcast addresses psychological trauma in an educational manner and is not designed to replace mental health treatment. If anything in this podcast makes you feel uncomfortable or anxious, please talk to a mental health professional.
Welcome, friends, to episode 85 of the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. I'm Matt. I'm here today with Jerry. Kurt was busy with early summer stuff, I guess. So you just got us today, and we're going to continue to explore the Bloom article on organizational stress as a barrier to trauma-informed care. So this builds off our conversation we started yesterday, on the last episode. But as always, we like to start out our episodes with our bright, shiny objects of the week. And Jerry, I'll give you mine. This is the first episode since the Game of Thrones finale. And I think I don't know if I enjoyed the finale more, which I actually did like, or people's adverse reaction to the ending of the series. I think it really shows the power of stories when they set up almost an NCAA March Madness sort of tournament for this throne and your team doesn't win. So I found the psychological response to the episode more enjoyable than the episode itself. But I love that series. I'll miss it. And boy, do we love our good stories. So that was kind of my bright, shiny object of the week, is just more or less watching people's reaction. I think there is a movement to re-record the whole last season. People hated it so much. But for me, hey, I enjoyed it all the way through. So probably my favorite television show ever. So I'll give them props. Nobody else wants to, but I thought they did the impossible, and they didn't drag it on for 2 more seasons and let it kind of fizzle out. So props to the Game of Thrones folks for stirring up a ton of controversy. And if nobody was angry, it probably wouldn't be good anyway. So good for them. So Jerry, what about you? What are you thinking about this week?
You know, the endings are hard, right?
Yep.
Goodbye to things is tough. Separation.
Yes.
Dealing with loss is something that we're always having to deal with. So I'm not surprised there's lots of feelings around the losses of something that was such a part of people's lives. To kind of looking at it, you know, I'm just finished. I'm in my end of almost my first year of my Tai Chi training, and I finished all 28 of the moves in the form. And so it was a little celebration for me this week, and now I have to go back and perfect all 28. But at least I have them, so when I go out on my deck or I go out in the park, at least I know 28 things to kind of look at.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, the process of learning something, as opposed to when you have memorized it and your body knows it and you're able to kind of get into a state. Takes a long time. It takes a really long time. And so, you know, a lot of the work that we do today with trauma victims or people who are struggling with some significant kinds of life challenges, we kind of want to get to a good place really quickly. And that's kind of an American thing, right? It's like, can we get through something really quickly? And to take a full year to kind of just learn this, And the thing about it in China, there's 108 moves in the form. So they got it down to 28, and it's still not. I can't learn it quick enough. It's kind of like, yeah. So I think when the things we're talking about is really trying to be patient and understand that recovery is a process, and healing is a process, and growing is a process. It's not an event. So I'm kind of proud of myself to stay with it, but I'm also really, really much more mindful of kind of understanding and being patient with people as they try to kind of make the changes in their lives that they need to make.
Very cool. Yeah, I love. I learned that the 28 forms, not as intensely as you have, but one of the things I really loved about Tai Chi, and I've been focusing on Wing Chun lately. I've really gotten into that, but it's fun to watch. At least I felt like I would, whether it was like playing pickleball, whether it was walking, I found myself in the movements. And it was just a really cool thing. It's like, oh, I'm in a Tai Chi. This is like a wave hands like clouds. I just kind of caught myself walking around the house, waving my hands like clouds. And it was just really cool to kind of find those movements in my everyday life and bring that level of mindfulness into my posture and those things. And I think we should do an episode on that at some point, because I think the posture stuff, there's been some interesting stuff written out there on the role of posture in mental health. And some interesting research out there. So maybe we'll have to take a look at that. I think my favorite is the punch, is that the 10-star punch that goes up. So yeah, I know you get to use that one very often, but I always felt cool when I did it. So So diving back into this article, and we're at, if people are following us kind of at home, we got to last episode we talked about parallel processes between client and staff, and then even looking at that at the larger organizational level as well. And so we kind of hit the point of the article about the impact of chronic stress on organizational functioning. And she really gets into mental health. I'd also throw, coming off the Healthcare for the Homeless conference, which was a great conference, public health in here now, social services, even education and other folks. Really just talks about kind of just the stress that we're under each and every day. And I think sometimes, I got to hang out with my friend, Dr. Deborah Bourne, who talks about this is the fire we signed up to walk into going into this work. But I also think it's important sometimes just to step back and think about all the stress that we are under. I think to appreciate it, because I think, as I did some of the trainings at this conference, I was really focusing on burnout and self-care and looking that physicians are the number one, nurses 2, social workers 3, teachers 4, principals 5. And I just think when I read this section of her article on, collective stress and trauma, I think it's important just to step back sometimes and think, not everybody in their job has to call Child Protective Services. Some people can go through their whole careers without having any thought as intense of, does this person I care about, are they going to commit suicide or leave their abusive partner? And I just think reading her article after this experience, again, whenever I think about homelessness, it's a chronic stress on the individuals experiencing this, just really kind of gave me a chance to step back and reflect and appreciate, even though, yeah, this is what we signed up to do. We walk in every day to a pretty intense fire. And I guess my question to kind of start us out with is, in your work, and as somebody I always admired that was able to really keep a level of sanity and peace in your work, my experience of you, how do you sort of look at all of this? Because in many ways, you look at what she puts out with lack of safety, emotional loss of emotional management, disassociation even. It seems like we should all just be freaking crazy. And so I kind of wondered, from your thoughts of looking at this, both from the psychological lens that you bring, but also leading organizations, just kind of think about all this stress that comes upon us every day, and how you kept yourself healthy and how you try to keep your staff healthy as well.
You know, if I think about, I reflect back on it, probably the most important piece for me was my relational connectedness. Is that what we know is, first of all, trauma is not something outside. Trauma is something inside. It's the meaning, it's the impact that has on our system. So, and we also know that relational connectedness is a major protective factor. And so when in my work, I really took a lot of time, not just seeing my staff as staff or my co-workers as workers, but really as their people, and how do I connect with them as individuals and stay connected. Even my clients is, how do I, they have a lot going on in their life, but there's a person in there.
Yeah.
How do I connect with the person to kind of look at that? And I think that over the years, that if I looked at the number one protective factor, was my ability to have relationships in the places I worked. Mm-hmm. And really feel both that I could, in some ways, empathize and feel that I wasn't alone. And also is that I was also open and receptive to people caring for me. Mm-hmm. So that when I think we look at some of the other things that Dr. Bloom kind of talks about, is the ability to have emotional regulation, the ability to have open communication, the ability to manage change and manage loss. Really, though, all those things as individuals, we have over hundreds of thousands of years managed those issues by connecting with people.
Yeah.
So I think that creating a relationally healthy environment at work is such an important component of the work that we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, because I'd love to get your thoughts on this as well, because I've often thought about this from a direct care sort of delivering of services, whether that's teaching a class, a medical appointment, therapy appointment, whatever it might be. Is one of the things when I look at kind of the model of burnout I use, and people get beyond that exhaustion phase, even if you've been in exhaustion a lot. One of the things I really think, and we've talked about this in different ways throughout this series we've been doing on trauma-informed workplaces, one of the first things that really, I think, becomes a struggle for us is our empathy and compassion, because it is such a intensive emotional labor thing to really connect with people in that way. That takes a lot of our energy up. That's why I think a lot of us feel at the end of the day we ran a marathon, even though we've been sitting down most of the day. The other thing, and I think what her article reminded me of with this as well, is that we also sometimes I catch people do this. They may be able to hold that together with their clients or patients or students, but then bringing that same compassion and energy in with their teammates, and even maybe trying then to go home and be a good parent. Is that it's almost like, I think we have a limitation on our empathy and compassion and patience. And I mean, you just look throughout the day. And so sometimes, when I hear her talk about increased authoritarianism and these pieces, in some ways I see this as a kind of almost a natural reaction to that we've just given everything we've had. And so now my teammates get the worst of me, or even my wife, or, I'm not the person I know I need to be there as well. And I just, I think that this just lays out that challenge of, man, this is exhausting work at times. Again, incredibly rewarding work, but exhausting, and how we need to make sure that we also don't let this impact our relationships with each other as well.
First of all, we used to talk about our empathy meter, right? It's like the meter's really low, right? So that concept of getting refueled.
Yes.
Of having to be. So, in some ways, the concept of, how do you have that same level of compassion and caring for yourself as you do for your clients? As you do, right? Is that in a way, if we stop and be reflective and realize we're tired and we do it, and there's a safe place to say that.
Yeah.
Right? It's open communication is like, I'm really exhausted, or I'm really kind of, my nerves are really shot this week, to kind of, right? Is almost like Dan Siegel's, if you name it, you could tame it.
Yeah.
Kind of looking at that piece. But I think it's so difficult for us as caretakers to care for ourselves. Mm-hmm. And to feel like that's not a weakness, or that's not something that has to be hidden in the process. And so, I think you started out by saying how much you looked at the research on self-care. Self-care is such an important part of the treatment process.
Yeah.
Of the healing process. Is that, my job really is to be present and attentive and attuned and resonate with the experience of my client. And if I'm not in a balanced kind of state, I'm not going to be able to do that. Right. And therefore, I have to be as compassionate and caring to myself as I am to the clients that I serve.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think, I think you bring up a good point. It's not only hard to keep that compassion, because again, our empathy meter goes down, then we go to a team meeting, and then we have to keep that for ourselves as well. And that's where that really, and I talked a lot about this at the conference, that guilt, shame, and doubt, what I use as kind of the second stage of that burnout. I just see so many people I talk to struggling with that, is that once I get exhausted, I know I'm not bringing my best self to work every day, and I know I need to be there. And I can have a bad day, but I know kind of week after week, I'm not able to give folks what they need. And I think that's not a comfortable place to be, when we know, that people's well-being is on the line, and our effectiveness has huge outcomes with individuals. So I think that it's hard sometimes and we need to try to remain kind to ourselves and just say, yeah, this work is really hard, and today wasn't my best day. Tomorrow I'm going to do some things to try to bring my best self, because again, we know the consequences a lot of our work as well.
One of the things that I've always asked myself is, what am I holding that's not mine?
Yeah.
Right? What is it that when I get really tired, what am I holding that's not mine? And sometimes it's about my clients, right? Sometimes I'm holding their pain and and I've got to figure out how to kind of, through my own practice, let that go, right? To kind of process is that I could be with you, but I also can't carry your burden. Kind of do it. My job is to help you, right? But sometimes I'm carrying pain of, my parents' pain. I'm carrying my brother's pain. I'm carrying my children's pain. As a caretaker, lots of us have grown up in this role of carrying other people's pain, right? And so I really have to be very conscious sometimes when I find myself getting really tired of kind of being reflective and saying, let me go towards this and see about what's this, what am I carrying that I don't need to be carrying?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's where I think that this, I kind of make, I wouldn't call this a joke, but the point I try to make is that you could have your stuff, your past in a good enough place to go to work at 99% of the jobs out there. And it's really in an okay place. If you've got any little scratch back there, this work is going to find it and do like a huge jig right on top of it. And that's where, like I think a lot of this, and what I loved about psychology and why I went on to go get a graduate degree in it is because, you know, I found out so much about myself along the way. And it's like, okay, I get to find out a lot about myself and I get to help people as well. And I was like, hey, this is what an amazing thing to learn about humanity, learn about myself, and help others in the process. But I think, you know, like you said, at times this will bring that stuff up in ways that hopefully, if we handle it effectively, we can grow as people. I think this work challenges us every day to grow and evolve and learn and become more resilient. And I just wonder, and again, reading some of Bloom's work, whether it's this article or Destroying Sanctuary, it's like there's this wave that instead of growing and learning and building resiliency, that so many of us just get rolled over by the stress. And so I think, and lose that kind of frame of reference. So I think there's so many opportunities for personal growth, and yet there's almost this wave that's always facing us in some ways to knock us back into our past trauma or into those later stages of burnout and secondary trauma as well. So there's this like really balance of opportunity there, but also great risk if we don't manage the stress well too. So I think it's that fascinating dichotomy of our work.
I think that there's a reality of going in and dealing with such pain.
Yeah.
Right? Is that being around people who are hurting, being around people who are injured, as we kind of think about it, and injured because of they're the victims of a economic system that kind of lets some people accumulate and some people get really hurt by it, right? To kind of look at that. They're the victims of people's other injuries that people that they've interacted with, family or whatever, that they were hurt, so they hurt them. So we're constantly dealing with people who are injured, right? And if you kind of think about in a hospital, there's a high risk of this being contagious, right? And if you have a wound in yourself, that part of you is most vulnerable to be infected by the work that you're kind of looking at.
I love that analogy.
Yeah. And so what we have to kind of do is really create our own practices to kind of help us to do this work without, in some ways, being harmed by it.
Yeah.
And I think that, I could do my own work in my own life, but then, Sandra Bloom's talked about what is the work that the organization and the team has to do to in some ways insulate us from the injuries that we're kind of dealing with. And in some of those commitments that she has to nonviolence, right? If you think about, even myself watching the Game of Thrones.
Yeah. After
watching Cersei hurt everybody, there was a part of me that wanted her to just get really annihilated, right?
Yeah.
The fact that she was able to get with her brother and die in a nice way left me kind of feeling unsatisfied, right? So there's this rage that when we see people hurting, other people that we have a tendency to want to hurt back.
Yeah.
And we've got to kind of manage that through our top part of our brain. And somebody practicing these nonviolent approaches really help us manage some of these instinctual kinds of things that are in some ways going to help us to feel better. But violence begets violence, right? It's like, so how do we kind of, in a way, you have to create whatever your organization does, right? Dr. Bloom gives you a recipe for that, whether that's the right one for you or not.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to have, the same way I have a practice in my life, you have to have a practice in your teams. You have to have a practice in your organizations. And I think you have to have a practice in our society to manage these kind of impulses to be violent, to be greedy, to be whatever those things are that happens to us when we feel hurt.
Yeah. Well, and you said I've customized it since, but you had a slide we co-presented. I don't know if you remember this years ago for United Way, back when not everybody was talking about trauma, and you had a really good slide that I've kind of adapted over the years. Is we kind of go into our own fight or flight response as well when we get overly stressed by this work, where the flight response, I think it was empathetic avoidance was the term of where we start to withdraw our empathy and compassion, and not necessarily strategically doing this, we're not intellectualizing this. It's a natural, just like the fight or flight response is a natural reaction. This is just a reaction to an overwhelming amount of stress. And we start to, I like to say, we start to put a kind of, our heart becomes concrete monument to who we once were. We don't have that ability. Or the other thing is we're pulled to over-identify with people. In other words, we might step over professional boundaries. We might start telling people, instead of having them go through their own change process, start telling them what to do, taking more ownership of clients' outcomes than is therapeutically healthy. And so there's this kind of reaction within of ourselves, and neither of those are good for clinical outcomes we get. But one of the things that I also wonder how much is playing in is, one is just like, we go to work every day, and there's stress in our jobs, getting everything done on time, going to meetings, those things. And then there's the emotions, like you talk about, with the wound and the contagious nature of infections. Then there's the stress and trauma we expose ourselves to. But then I think she makes a good point, and it's something I focus a lot on, especially around homelessness. But also, I do a lot of work. I'm actually heading out to Cape Cod, where the opiate epidemic is devastating that community in ways that, if you travel to some of these places, we're lucky in Colorado to not be at maybe the level they are out east in Appalachia and other places. But there's nobody that I meet that hasn't known somebody that has died from an overdose. And so on one hand, there's all this stress, but then there's the problems we confront. And on a good day, I can wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to be a part of ending homelessness today. I'm going to do something that brings something positive to that gigantic effort. When I start to get tired, ending homelessness seems like an impossible mountain to climb. Ending racism, the opiate epidemic, all these things, which are huge mountains and almost impossible mountains, also become overwhelming on that. And so in her article, she talks about this helplessness that comes from this. And I've also seen that, I think, in our work in child welfare is, okay, they're in this system that's not adequately sometimes funded. While we might have tried to create the best program possible, knowing their next step might not be the best for them. We were pushed when we worked together, as one of our outcomes was, you need to get these kids out of residential in 3 months. Well, we both had the conversation is that 3 months might be perfect for kid A. It might be harmful for kid B. Kid B might need 9 months. And so I kind of wonder how that sort of these these huge the issues, whether it's child abuse, domestic violence that we deal with every day. How have you helped people like myself through supervision that can get overwhelmed by this? Again, keep regulated in the midst of all this stress from our work, stress from the clinical interactions we have, and then the big societal issues that we're also taking on.
Well, when you get passionate about something, you're vulnerable not to be regulated, right? And not being regulated sometimes causes people to get superpower and change things. It is that this work will mean that sometimes you're going to be exhausted. Sometimes you're going to feel on top of the world, like I'm really being successful today, and tomorrow I feel helpless. Is to understand that you're surfing those waves. Yeah. That's you've got to be able to deal with the loss and the pain on one side and the success on the other. It's like the wide world of sports, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat.
Yes.
It's kind of like those are all states. They're not if you over-identify with a state, you get stuck there.
Yeah.
But you will go through periods, our clients are dealing with incredible senses of helplessness and powerlessness.
Yeah.
So we will join them in that place, right? And then we will also at times be in this place where we have these sessions with them where we think, oh my God, the whole world changed today. And it's like, no, they'll come back next week and they'll be in a different place, right?
Right, yeah.
So for me is, how do I be mindful to understand that this is not permanent, this place I'm in. Right? This is where I'm at right now, and how do I be nurturing to myself when I'm in this kind of, I bring the part, there's a part of me that's helpless, but there's a part of me that's kind of okay. So I bring that part of me to nurture the helpless part of me, right? So is that realizing that that's part of the process that we'll go through.
Yeah.
And that, when we get there together, really, how do we stop and kind of recognize that we're feeling really overwhelmed right now? Mm-hmm. Right? What do we need to kind of to do it? And we're not going to stay here for eternity, right? Everything is not permanent.
Yeah.
Right? So I think the wish is, oh, we stay in this when we're fighting homelessness. We'll stay in this place that we're being successful every day. It's like, that's the wish. But the reality is there's ups and downs. The reality is there's days we're going to be really angry at the system for not doing things, right? It's like, okay, so we're in this angry state. How do we let that, without getting defensive about it, just let's kind of be with our anger today.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's, I think that's an amazing point. Like allowing yourself, right? And again, this is where supervision, this is where supportive coworkers. Now, if we're angry every day, we've got a whole different problem. But, we will get there because, and this is the thing that I'm really trying to hammer into folks, not because we're weak, but because we're human beings. And I think sometimes we expect so much of ourselves that when we fall from such great heights. It's like, oh, we're supposed to be healers. We're supposed to be physicians. So when we're not perfect, we seem to fall. But we're human. And I'm really trying to make the big statement is, you're going to need therapy if you're going to do this work for your entire career. There will be something that happens that will traumatize you. And whether that's, something very like violence happening, whether that's more of a psychological piece, but it's like, because we're human beings, and if you want to stay healthy, you're going to need help beyond even sometimes what the organization offers you in supervision. The other thing that, and this is fresh in my mind because, and we had her on the podcast, Dr. Barbara DiPietro from Baltimore, Healthcare for the Homeless. We did it was a real fun presentation on advocacy and self-care. And it really speaks to me about this helplessness is one of the things that as I kind of went up the organizational chart, I got to do a little bit more advocacy out there. And what we took on is a way to combat kind of this hopelessness, helplessness, which I think naturally seeps in from time to time, is how do we let folks in our organizations, or how do we find time, even if it's just, an hour a month or something like that, to kind of think about going upstream solutions. And this can be as small as maybe making individual calls to the legislator and rallying around it, or one of the things we did at where we work together is, and I saw this big impact, is we took some of our really good staff and they started to become trainers for other organizations. And boy, once you got them over the nerves, you could just see kind of their chest sticking out in a different way. And what an honor that was to kind of step out of their day-to-day and share and step into that role as experts. So that's another thing I've been really thinking of, is I think sometimes we're so busy trying to keep, a sinking ship afloat that we don't really peek our head above the water sometimes and say, okay, how can we have an impact on some of the larger issues that cause the needs for our service in the first place? And that's a challenge I think that we can take on. And again, it's not going to be 10 hours a week of advocacy, but what are little things we can do to really empower our staff to feel that, yeah, we're dealing with the problems, but we're also trying to be part of the solutions as well. And I think if that piece is missing, hopelessness can seep in pretty rapidly for us too. Any other final thoughts on this article? I mean, we've covered a lot of this, and she kind of leaves us in a hopeful place. But I think the thing that she challenges us, and she uses her sanctuary model, which I know we're both big fans of the work of Dr. Bloom has done over the years. But I think that the takeaway and the hope is to think about the model that you're using to, again, we use the trauma-informed lens as a great analogy for this. What models are you using to view these challenges? I think when the challenges are just challenges that aren't put in some perspective, those all become overwhelming for us. And so she kind of gives the sanctuary model. I know we use more of the general trauma-informed lens, but any other kind of small suggestions that you might send us away as we kind of wrap up this whole trauma-informed workplace fun series that we've been on?
I think with a lot of what we've talked about through 85 chapters, episodes of this, right, is how chronic stress, how toxic chronic stress is.
Yeah.
Right? And in a way, we're also saying that the work that we do has an opportunity to be an incredible healing, growth opportunity for people who want to invest in work that's purposeful, that's meaningful, that you can make an impact in people's lives, right? So stress can be when you feel a sense of control, when you feel a sense of predictability, when you feel a sense of having these periods of relaxation and away from things. Stress can be really a positive thing in your life.
Yeah.
However, doing this work can be dangerous. It can create major problems so that both you as an individual and you as an organization is to make a commitment to say, how do we increase the probability that the people that are coming to work with us are going to get the benefits from this work and minimize the real long-term costs of this work.
Yeah.
And I think that some of the work that we've talked about of looking at how teams function, looking at how decisions are made, looking about how there's an emphasis on self-care in your organization, all of these things are really important, no less important than a hospital doing universal precautions for people going on
Yeah.
on units in which there's really sick individuals, right?
Yep.
And we have to realize as this research comes out that the toxicity of this work can be very, very dangerous to people.
Yep.
And it could also be an incredible opportunity for people, right? So we want to create processes in our organizations to maximize the benefit and minimize the risks.
Absolutely. And again, it's the mantra that I really believe I have every bit of research to back up. To do this work effectively, we got to take care of ourselves first. And I think if you take that out from what we've been doing, the trauma-informed workplace, we've got to learn how to take care of each other as coworkers, as supervisors, supervisees. Just writing that blog series I did on meetings, I got a lot of really powerful feedback from people that say this is really great because we have some issues. And I just again think about that trauma-informed lens on it. I hope we've given people throughout this series ways to think a little differently about the really challenging work of creating and then maintaining a trauma-informed workplace. So it's been a great series. We are going to be off next week. Jerry is heading to the West Coast. I'm going out to the East Coast. And we're kicking around some ideas for maybe a little bit of a fun summer series for us. A little bit lighter. People are on vacation. You don't want to necessarily hear about hardcore trauma on the beach when you're listening to us. So we're thinking about some ways to tackle maybe some bigger issues in a fun way. And kind of be a little lighter over the summer with that. So we'll hopefully see everybody in 2 weeks, and we'll kind of figure out what we're doing and hopefully have some fun summer listening for you all. So take care, happy summer, and we'll see you all shortly.